What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Throughout the history of the game, one of the biggest challenges the League developers have faced is how to balance things for professional play while also balancing for casual play. They've always taken both aspects into account when balancing and designing things, especially champions of course, but quite often there are discrepancies that can cause major issues in certain champions or the meta. One of the biggest examples of this is Ryze. Statistically, the actual worst champion in the entire game, Ryze has a win rate that currently sits at the lowest of all of the League of Legends champions, currently across multiple win rate websites. LolKing.com even places him at a win rate below 40% overall, so strictly looking at the statistics and nothing else, Ryze could be considered the actual worst champion in the game right now. However, despite being the statistically worst champion in League of Legends, Ryze is certainly not the worst champion in the game in terms of just about everything else. And in fact, he is currently seeing competitive play right now. Most recently, Ryze was used by Korean mid laner Maple at the Midsummer Invitational Tournament in a game where he went 12-0-7 and undoubtedly carried his team to an overwhelming victory. So despite being one of the worst statistical champions, Ryze manages to be one of the more prominent mid laners in professional play, at least in Korea that is. Now designing a champion to be playable in both professional and casual play is generally not a problem that occurs too often. The large majority of League champions scale evenly in this aspect. If they're good in pro play, they're good in casual play, and vice versa, and as a result, a lot of casual play champions are popularized by pro players in the first place. But for some champions, an inverse scaling can occur, where they can be amazing in pro play and horrible in casual play, or vice versa. Although there is no set guidelines or rules, there are three major tendencies that these champions who are much stronger in pro play typically have. Again, they are not completely decisive, but having a couple or all three of these traits do tend to make a champion much stronger in pro play, while also at the same time much weaker in casual play. First and foremost, champions like this are always challenging to play. It's no secret that the average casual player will likely struggle with a champion that is on the more difficult side of things. On the flip side though, champions that are harder to play typically have more outplay potential, which means that when they're played at the absolute highest level of skill, they are much stronger than they otherwise would be. In the case of Ryze, his high mechanical difficulty, skill shot reliance, and overall skill set does tend to be on the more challenging side of things. Ryze is far from the most difficult champion in the game, but he's certainly not easy to play. In addition, these champions are often heavily reliant on their team. Team strategy and team-based gameplay is something that will pretty much always be a huge crutch for a champion in solo queue, because you just can't rely on your team as much in that type of setting. Whereas in pro play, as you would expect, these team-based strategies can shine through immensely and become incredibly powerful. This is definitely where Ryze fits in. With his ultimate, it can be a completely game-changing tool if your team can use it properly, but in solo queue, teams just don't have the coordination to utilize the ability to its maximum potential. You could be the absolute best Ryze player in the entire world, and you will still have a much harder time in solo queue than you would otherwise, because you'll be missing that coordination that is so crucial to making his ultimate work at its maximum potential. And the third major thing that can define a champion in this area of design are their weaknesses, or lack thereof, depending on how they're designed. Now this is a design trait that is much more likely to make a champion bad in professional play, but good in solo queue rather than the other way around, but there are a couple that can benefit from this aspect, and I would make the argument that Ryze is probably one of them. Ryze's combos allow for a ton of versatility and utility that give you something for any situation, both aggressive and defensive, and as a result, because of his skill set, he's able to almost cover up his weaknesses in a way. But probably the most iconic benefactor of this design trait that I'd prefer to use as an example here was Azir actually, at least before he got nerfed a bunch of times. Azir was a champion that, when played to his fullest potential, really just had no weaknesses. Or at least he wouldn't on paper, because if he was played perfectly, his kit was so incredibly versatile that he could be played in a way that completely negated the supposed weaknesses of his kit, to the point where he would just become unstoppable. So I guess really the better way to think about this design trait is the more versatile a champion is, the better they will be in professional play, because they're able to cover up their weaknesses to some extent, but at the same time, being more versatile does not help a champion succeed in solo queue, because the casual players are, on average, unable to make the most of that said versatility. These three major focus points of design in a champion's gameplay are typically what shapes the difference in strength for pro versus casual play. But at the end of the day, what's really important to us is going to be how casual play is affected. Riot has always had the approach in balancing that nothing is allowed to be outrageously overpowered in any circumstance, be it pro or casual, and since they take both casual and pro play into account when balancing, when a champion like this dominates professional play, they are inevitably going to get nerfed, and as a result become completely unplayable for the casual player when they already weren't even that good in the first place. And this causes a lot of issues for a lot of champions in casual play, and as a result, we're left with quite a few champions right now that could definitely use some buffs for casual play, but unfortunately just can't get them because pro play is holding them back. And it's an issue that the developers have struggled with for a long time on quite a number of champions. Unfortunately, the solution, although it is quite clear-cut, is not necessarily a great one. The only real way to solve this issue for a champion is, of course, with a rework. And unfortunately, this is something that Ryze is going to need once again if he wants to have this issue solved for him. The problem is just that these things stem from the gameplay, the mechanics, design of a champion, rather than their numbers, so there's no real way to nerf or buff them without making them extremely overpowered in professional play, or making them completely unplayable in casual play. But believe me when I say that Riot definitely understands this, and it's precisely why we are seeing a ton of what are essentially mini reworks to champions. Especially in the last year, there has been a massive increase in Riot changing and tweaking mechanics and ability design rather than buffing or nerfing numbers. When I see a change to a champion that influences their mechanics for better or for worse, it makes me a lot more excited and intrigued than a change that just gives a champion plus or minus 5 AD. Because although these mechanics changes may not always be for the best, they are certainly necessary to experiment with when trying to solve issues in gameplay. In an ideal world, every single champion in the game would be playable in some form of niche in both professional and casual play. However, it just so turns out that it's going to take a lot of reworks for us to get there. Thanks for watching. This video was part of a series I'll be doing where I attempt to highlight and explain the more complex and underappreciated design aspects of League of Legends. So leave a comment and let me know if there is another mechanic or perhaps a design concept that you would like me to take a look at. Either way, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time.